Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 2 o'clock and this hearing session is open. My name's Rishin Barrett. I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out an independent examination of the Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. I'll refer to it as the plan. That's document SD01. Jill Taylor is the Programme Officer, sat to my right. She's working independently of the Council at my direction and is responsible for all administrative arrangements to do with the examination. If you've got any queries, please contact her in person or by email. Please can you turn phones to silent or laptops to silent? Toilet facilities are downstairs. Follow the signs. We're not expecting a fire alarm. If it does sound, it's a real one. Out this door and then
down the fire escape. And if there's anyone in the Wickham room, as you leave the Wickham room, there is a fire escape directly to your left.
That's the overspill room, isn't
Yes.
it? The Wickham. Yeah. And leads for laptops. Can you just be aware that if you do have leads trailing behind you, that before everyone starts moving, you just pull them up to avoid anyone tripping over them. Guidance notes are on the website, along with matters, issues and questions, along with a hearing programme. I expect you to all have referred to those. I've produced an agenda for today that doesn't include all of the matters, issues and questions that I've raised. That doesn't mean that they aren't things that are of concern to me. What it means is that I've just focused on the things that I feel I need to hear more on in order to come to a decision. I've read all the representations and supporting material. No need to go through that all again. I'll spend some time with the council on each of my questions, and then I'll turn to people around the table. Please, as the sessions get busier, say all you need to say in one go. Please, I won't invite rebuttals between you. Please don't repeat what's already been said. If you do agree with what's been said, just say, I totally endorse what's just been said. However, I'd like to add to it. In making your points, it's very helpful to me if you refer to the 4 sets of tests of soundness, para 35. And they are positively prepared, providing a strategy which, as a minimum, seeks to meet the objectively assessed needs of the area and is informed by agreements with other authorities, so that unmet need from neighbouring areas is accommodated where it's practicable to do so, and is consistent with achieving sustainable development, justified and appropriate strategy taking into account reasonable alternatives and based on proportionate evidence, effective, deliverable over the plan period and based on effective joint working on cross-boundary strategic matters that have been dealt with rather than deferred, as evidenced by statements of common ground, and consistent with national policy, enabling the delivery of sustainable development in accordance with policies in the framework and other statements of national planning policy where relevant. Okay, I just want to make clear my approach to emission sites. We've got people around the table who haven't attended previously, or have we? Have we got anyone here who hasn't attended previously? Part of my task is to examine the soundness of the approach to meeting the plan's needs, including sites that are allocated for development in the submitted plan. Those who have submitted representations to that effect, that the site is unsound, to the effect that the site is unsound will be able to put their views to me at that relevant session. If they've made a request to do so, the council will then have an opportunity to respond. Sites that are put forward for inclusion in the plan but not selected for allocation are known as omission sites. It's not part of my role to examine the soundness of omission sites, and subject to the legal right to be heard, such sites will not normally be discussed in detail at any of the hearing sessions. Now, should the situation arise that additional sites are needed, for example, housing requirement, spatial strategy, plan period, or any of the allocations are found to be unsound, I'll look to the council in the first instance to decide which alternative site should be brought forward. Okay, just want to make that very clear. Okay then.
Mark, before we start, I've just noticed that the doors at the back there have been closed. Given that this is probably going to be the most stuffiest of all the sessions, at least in the physical sense, might not be a bad idea to have them open. I wasn't going to say
If
that.
it gets cold, we can close them. Okay, then let's start off with the calculation of local housing needs. So the council has calculated local housing needs. That's using the government standard methodology. That figure gives, and I'm looking at the submitted plan, 13,565 dwellings over the plan period. That plan period 2020 to 2040. We spoke this morning about the plan period, so we dealt with that. I don't want to go over that ground again. That includes an affordability adjustment. And what I'm asking is, does that accord with the standard method? I've just got a query on this. On page 215 of the plan, you calculate it from 2020 to 21, and then you do a calculation 2024 to 2040. So there isn't a great variation. 2020 to 2021 is 685, and then it goes up a little bit in 22, 23, and then comes down 24 to 40. Now, it's quite clear that local housing need should be calculated at the start of the plan making process and kept under review and revised as appropriate. And then we know that the figure can be relied upon for plan making for a period of 2 years from the time that the plan submitted for examination. Now, this is a genuine query. I haven't come across calculation in that way where it's done per year. Could you just explain that to me and what the justification for that is, bearing in mind that you've heard what I've said about the figure being reviewed?
It's really what you just said about the figure being determined from the start of the plan period, which we say should be 2020. And obviously we know what the standard methods figures for each of those years were. So what we've done there is, in the years where we have a standard method figure, but it's changed, we put 1 year's worth of that figure in that table. Once we can fix it, i.e. on submission of the plan, we can fix it for 2 years, then we assume that is what it will remain for the rest of the plan period, hence the 276 times 16.
Okay, so that's the 676. So you've done that by 16 years, and
Yeah.
then you've calculated it per year.
Yeah, the per year is because that's what the standard method was in those years.
Okay.
I think at the Reg 18 stage, some development interest said we ought to use the same figure over 20 years, which at that time benefited them. If we did that now, it would actually reduce the requirement slightly, but we think as we know what standard method figures was in each of those years, we ought to apply that, and then from when it's fixed, we apply the fixed figure.
Okay, so it would, if you did it as I just just been saying. So you started at the plan period, so that's 685,
Yeah.
and then you forecast that forward. But you're saying you haven't done that because you've reviewed it in line with PPG, what PPG says.
Yeah.
Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have any comment on that? I mean, there was that's my query, but there was broad agreement on the way in which local housing need has been calculated. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So can we turn to question 2, please, which is about the substantive evidence to demonstrate that it would be appropriate to plan for a higher housing need figure than the standard method indicates, in this case, as per advice in PPG. So what you've done, you've calculated that over the 20 years of the plan period, and then you've added in the unmet needs allowance, 1900, and then you've taken away the 350 for the national park. Is that right?
Well, what we've done, this is, it all comes back to the difficulty with the unmet needs.
Yeah, no. And we don't want to go over, we've dealt with the unmet needs yesterday. I've heard evidence on that, but no, please carry on.
So basically what we've done is the starting point obviously is the standard method figure. We've been aware from the outset that we had to address unmet needs in push, but as we discussed at length yesterday, that's a very difficult thing to do at any point in time. So what we've done is consulted on and used the evidence to determine what is the most appropriate development strategy for the district and what capacity that will give us. And basically the difference between the capacity of the development strategy and the standard method requirement is where the unmet needs allowances come from.
So, okay, we've heard about the unmet needs allowance. Is there any other overriding justification?
Not in the council's opinion, no. We did address this in some detail in the housing topic paper and went through each of the examples in the PPG as to why it might be appropriate to increase the standard method figure. Our conclusion was the only reason is the unmet need allowance.
So you went to the PPG, you assessors. I have read the housing topic paper. Could I ask, has anybody got any comments on that, please? Crowders?
Thank you. Yes, David Neame from Neame Sutton on behalf of Crowdace Homes. Well, the short answer is yes. There are, I think, 3 factors that drive the potential for an uplift from the standard method as the starting point. The first is the matter of unmet need, which, as you quite rightly said, was covered in detail yesterday. So I'm not going to repeat everything that was covered yesterday, but suffice to say, I agree with all of that. And the need is clearly much greater than the 1900 dwellings that the council make allowance for. The other 2 factors that I just want to spend a little bit of time on. First is the affordability within the district, the worsening affordability within the district. We've recently had updated affordability ratio data published 25th of March. So that updates the position that we set out in our matters statement. Winchester is at 12.84 times in terms of the average house price to earnings ratio against the national average of 7.75. That's massive. And it has a significant impact in terms of the capability of people to actually access open market housing in the district. The council's topic paper, so the original topic paper SD10G, paragraph 320 for your reference, that confirms that the council has an increasing need for affordable housing. And that's increased in the short period of time between 2020 and 2024. And that, of course, is symptomatic of the inherent lack of affordability in terms of the market housing within the district. The figures I'd set out within our statement, Madam, and they're referenced there in the council's own topic paper, so I won't rehearse those. But the other stark statistic is that there is over 1,500 people sitting on the waiting list currently within the district for affordable housing, and that's massive. And given the significance of the affordability problem within the district, that's only going to get worse. And really, there is only one way to properly address that, and that is through an uplift to housing delivery, because the majority of affordable housing, as we know, is delivered through the Section 106 process, which in turn comes forward as a result of open market housing developments. So that's the second factor. The third factor, and Mr. Young went through this yesterday, so again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it is the presence of the new framework and the government's imperative to deliver 1.5 million new homes in this parliamentary term. That is a material consideration in terms of the direction of travel in terms of housing need. In fact, we already know what the housing need is for this district that the council will have to address through, it says, an immediate review of this plan in any event. But linked to that, of course, is the requirement within paragraph 236 of the 24 framework, which is that in July next year, there will be a mandatory 20% buffer applied to the council's 5-year housing land supply calculation, which is again going to compound the situation. So I think for those three key factors in my mind are strong reasons for why there should be an uplift to the base standard method calculation.
Okay. Does the council want to respond to that? So you say that you looked at those factors, but you've heard what, I'm sorry, I can't see your name, but Crowders Homes have said. Have you got anything to respond to that?
Not a lot to add to what we put in our statement, in response to your question 6, paragraphs 126 to 133 of the council statement. I mean, yes, affordability is clearly an issue in Winchester, as it is in many authorities within the southeast. It was mentioned this morning in relation to the question of the start date and looking back. Oh well, you've been failing to meet affordable housing needs as well. Well, of course, what we have been doing in the last few years is providing very large numbers of houses that actually would meet the affordable needs that were identified in the 2020 housing market assessment, which are lower than what they are now. But what I do in the response is look at, well, what are we actually planning to deliver in the initial years of the local plan before it's replaced by the new review? And the conclusion is we're going to be averaging 925 dwellings a year up until 2033 to 34. If you look at the need coming out for affordable rented housing coming out of the strategic housing market assessment, is exactly 40% of that figure. Now, I appreciate we're not necessarily going to get 40% from every site and all for social housing, but one thing that did strike me in looking at some of the other participant statements, and I noticed it particularly in the HBF's one, but I think there was another one about national figures on the proportion of affordable housing coming from Section 106 sites, which I must admit I hadn't seen before. I think something like 44% nationally, 70% in Winchester.
That's right.
I haven't seen them. I have to assume they're right. But I think the fact that only 70% of affordable housing is coming from Section 106 sites and another 30% is coming from other sources is actually quite significant. And, you know, I go through in the council statement what those other sources might be. And there is also the private rented sector, which with benefits is accommodating much of the unmet affordable housing need. Just on the direction of travel, this will no doubt come up again and again, as it has already. I would simply say look no further than paragraph 1 of the MPPF, both the 2023 and the 2024 version. Getting local plans in place is a priority. It couldn't be any more upfront. It's in paragraph 1. The way the current government plans to do that is through the contingency arrangements. Now, when they published a draft MPPF in July last year, those contingency arrangements were submit your local plan within 1 month of the MPPF publication, and you can go to examination. If the government had taken the view that it didn't want all these so-called old plans or old numbers going forward, it could have scrapped that. But actually what it did was the reverse. It extended it to 3 months. So, the government's policy on taking forward local plans is in their own words, a priority and on a par with the need for housing provision. And, that's something I think is important and needs to be borne in mind through this. And they want to see plans going forward, not sort of having to start again.
Okay.
Can I just add to that within the context of paragraph 61, which requires that for there to be a departure from the standard method, there must be exceptional circumstances. And just very quickly trotting through that list, the unmet need we've discussed, affordability, whilst yes, it is an acute problem, that is not exceptional, sadly to say. And of course, as Steve has just said in detail, obviously the government's provided a transitional mechanism, and you can't start undermining that transitional mechanism by trying to say that you should start taking account of the new MPPF figures for which there is mechanism in place.
No, I understand that point. Okay. Sorry, who is that? Is that a Flynn? Turn it around.
So 2 points. One, housekeeping one, the moment which my back freezes.
I'm sorry?
The moment which my back freezes is beginning rapidly approaching. So we might want to consider the door closing.
Oh, should we just?
It's fine at the moment, but it's getting a little drafty at this end of the table. That's a slightly prosaic point. The more significant point is that the question is really about evidence of whether it's appropriate to plan for a higher housing need.
Well, this is about deviating from the standard method. We're getting on to the requirement later.
Yes, but the way the PPG frames it, but perhaps slightly unhelpfully, to be quite honest with you, and it refers to going for a higher need figure than the standard method indicates. And the PPG provides a non-exhaustive list of the sort of factors that might arise. And my point really just amplifies or takes forward what Mr. Neame referred to, and that's the SHMA update, table 3.7. What that does is it's part of the SHMA's process of estimating what the affordable housing need is going to be over the plan period, and it does that by looking partly at the households in need now, but then also at the creation of new households over the plan period and the proportion of those that will be in housing need. And what that shows is it uses ONS projections, which it describes at para 3.23. And those projections show that the district will see 843 additional households every year, which is higher than the standard method minimum figure. Now, that's without getting to the archaeology of it all. The standard method figure was based on 2014 projections, and those have been superseded, and the government never updated them for reasons, we won't go into. But the point is, there is evidence in front of the council in the SHMA to say it would be appropriate to adopt a higher need figure because there will be more households generated or coming forward in Winchester than the standard method assumed. And therefore that 843 is greater than the standard method. It completely eradicates any benefit that would arise from the affordability uplift that applied to the 2014 figure. So rather than actually meeting a sort of a measure of need based on local evidence, which we've got in the SHMA, the plan is actually providing for less than that. So if I was the plan maker, I'd be looking at that evidence going, well, actually, there is actually substantive evidence to say it would be appropriate to plan for a higher housing need figure, or at the very least to test it. And that hasn't been carried out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Young.
Yeah, thank you, madam. So everybody recognises that the 676 is the wrong number. It's got nothing to do with need, affordability, as Mr. Spry says, household formation rates, anything like that. It's just the wrong number. And of course, it's an old number and it's an out-of-date number based on completely inadequate standard method formula that didn't really add up to 300,000 anyway, etc., etc. So we're using the wrong number. How long are we using the wrong number? That's the key thing. My learned friend quite rightly praised and the government have put in place transitional arrangements. That should tell you that the government is happy to have that arrangement. Of course, what they really want is at least 80% of the figure achieved. They don't really want lots of reviews going on, which they've got no control on. And you rightly observed there's nothing in the PPG or the MPPF who tells us anything about the mechanics of that review. It's absolutely a last resort and frankly ill thought out in my opinion. But at the very least, in a 15-year plan, this plan should not be based on 676 with all the other inadequacies we've talked about, you know, existing sites, etc. Shouldn't be based on more than 676 for 5 years, should it? We know that the plan will have to be reviewed in 5 years. None of us have got any confidence on Winchester's past record that there will be a review. And, you know, it'd be naive, frankly, not to look at past track record of this council and many others who've sought to avoid it in high value areas. But at the very least, from 5 years from the adoption of the plan, when the protection of its paragraph 77, I said 78 earlier, but 77 in the 2023 version should be based on the 1,117. So that's the figure that the rest of the plan period. Either have a 5-year plan, nobody does that, do they? Because you can't, or have a 15-year plan, but have the right figure in it. So the rest of this plan, unquestionably, unequivocally, 100% should be based on 1,117 a year, and I can't think of one possible argument against that.
Where are you getting your?
That's the current standard method figure.
Oh, okay.
Why would you plan over a 15-year period on the wrong figure when you know the 676 is only going to last for 5 years anyway? It will be 1,117 from beyond the 5-year period. The plan must be surely planning for 1,117 from 5 years from the adoption of the plan. And I just, there's no argument against that, is there? Not a sensible one, unless you're trying to massively avoid housing need, which I presume the council aren't, are they?
Should you be planning for the 24 standard method in this plan?
No, I mean, Mr. Young's making the rules up as he goes along, isn't he?
No,
We're
no,
doing what the advice tells us.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
to be honest, I'm not quite sure where the 1117 comes from. We think it's this year is 1128, but anyway, I'm
Okay, but
not going to get into that because it's completely the wrong.
no,
figure.
but what was said was that it should be in line with the 24 standard method, whatever that is. I don't know. I haven't done that. Oh, okay. Thank you. I don't need any more help on that. Okay. So let's move to the housing requirement, and we've said, and you've confirmed how you've got to that, but there's this issue about the contribution that's made by the South Downs National Park. And just to give context, can you just explain why that has been done, bearing in mind the arrangements with the National Park?
Yes, ma'am. It's basically because the standard method figure is a district-wide figure, but we aren't able to prepare a district-wide plan because a great chunk of the district, 40% by area, is in the national park. So the last local plan was a joint authority, a joint plan with the National Park. This one is a Winchester plan. And there is an existing South Downs National Park plan, and that is in the process of being reviewed. So we're unable to sort of control what will come forward in the park part of the district, local plan wise. So to be able to see whether we're meeting our district wide standard method figure, we have to make an assumption about how much will come forward in the national park. And that is what this does. We've based it on, we think, quite a cautious estimate of what is carrying forward of what has happened in the past, on the basis that the National Park Authority are in the process of bringing forward a local plan with some new allocations. We think the park have taken a rather cautious view, which is perhaps not surprising given their objectives, but we think that they will be able to exceed that. But in any event, what we're talking about is 100 dwellings over the plan period. And I would just like to pick up, I think it was O'Rourke's who are saying it's 100 a year, and just this difference will wipe out the
No, it's
the
100
unmet
over
need
the plan.
allowance. It's 100 in total.
Yes. Okay. So, sorry, so 250, the National Park have suggested, and you're saying 350. So how do you get, I know it's only, as you say, 100 over the plan period, but how do you get, what are the assumptions you're making that differ from the South Downs National Park?
Well, part of the problem is we don't know exactly what assumptions the National Park are making, but what we've done is looked at completion, because obviously we're starting at 2020 again. So we've looked at completions between 2020 and 24. We've looked at what commitments there are. And then we've looked at past completion levels and project those forward for the rest of the plan period. I'm just trying to find
That's in the topic paper update, isn't it?
I'm trying to remember whether it's in the topic paper or the update, and to point you to the reference. Oh, here we are. It looks like the update, EDO2, page 22. Actually, I think the place I go into it in more detail is in the original housing topic paper, in the bit looking at unmet needs.
Okay, and you make the point in the statement's common ground, it's not a point of disagreement, it's a point of uncertainty.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, so you'll see we have a statement of common ground. The National Park haven't objected to the council's plan. In fact, they support the unmet needs allowance. Sorry, I can't find it off the top of my head.
No,
but
don't
I
worry,
can give
don't
you
worry.
the reference later on.
I've got it here. Yeah. Thank you very much. Does anybody wish to say anything about that figure that's taken off? But Barwood Land?
Thank you. I just had a minor point to raise on that. It's just in para 4.34 of the council's topic paper.
Yeah.
They talk about the figure assigned to South Downs, and any shortfall can be addressed via the unmet needs allowance. Just to say that obviously we've discussed it a lot in response to matter one, but the unmet needs allowance is considered significantly under what is required. And it's now in line with the modifications assigned to Portsmouth and Havant. So there isn't any unmet need to rely on that point.
Thank you very much. I was going to come on to that point because quite clearly you say this, but the 1900 is already accounted for, isn't it? Could you just respond to that point, please?
Well, this is one of the reasons why we didn't actually want to allocate it to particular unmet needs. It is, and if you like, an over provision in the South Hampshire housing market area for unmet needs in that area. Now we have subsequently agreed with Hammond and Portsmouth to allocate it to between them. The national park is slightly different because the need in the national park is part of Winchester District's need. So although from their point of view, it's a need they won't be able to meet, and we're happy to meet it, it's technically not an unmet need from a neighbouring authority. It's actually part of Winchester's need. So it would effectively reduce the amount available for other unmet needs by 100 in the worst case.
Okay, so, sorry, I just want to be clear. So you're saying that what you've put in 4.34 is because that's actually Winchester's need. It's not separated as the South Downs National Park need, and therefore it would reduce the 1900.
That's right.
I
It's
understand.
part of the Winchester district need, which is what the standard method applies to, and it would reduce the 1900. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Would anybody like to say anything about that? Oh, I'm sorry. Home Builders Federation.
Thank you, Mum. I think the point that's just been made, I think, with regard to it, even though it's a small number, does reflect the point that I think has been made across the day yesterday and today, that the council haven't been planning for unmet need is an outcome of the strategy they put forward, rather than saying actually this is the amount of unmet need that there is, and we are going to actively and positively plan for that. The council have said, well, this is the remainder of what's of the strategies there, and therefore anything that we can't then deliver just comes off that 1900. So it is within that flexibility. So I think there's a lot of confusion in terms of actually how, but I think that's a point we were sort of making yesterday. In terms of the number that's coming from the national park, I would suggest that looking at national park and looking at past delivery and future delivery, I don't think is an appropriate way to look at it. I think there's so much uncertainty as to and constraints within the national park as to what can forward. I think looking at what maybe happened in the past isn't necessary. I think relying on what the national park is expecting in terms of the 250 is a more appropriate way. Granted, it is a small number, but I think it's just that wider point as to how the council have approached that level of unmet need within the strategy. I think it's just confused because of the comments that have just been made.
Sorry, I'm just interested. Why do you say that it's an inappropriate way, the way that the council have looked at the South Down National Park contribution? Why that's?
I think in terms of the way they've looked at it is that they've looked at what's happened in the past and then expected that to come forward. I think within a national park, the sites are so limited in terms of what could come forward, and it is a very constrained area in terms of that. It's not necessarily what happened in the past will necessarily happen in the future. I think it is a significant uncertainty as to what will necessarily come forward in across a national park within one area, given that it's planning over such a large area in terms of that area, and what will come forward. I think there's just a significant amount of uncertainty to use that approach in terms of saying, oh, well, this has come forward and passed, so therefore it's logic that it will come forward again. I don't think that is the case. In Windfall, you may look at that in that sort of way and say, well, actually, logic would dictate that we've seen it over a number of years, but I don't think that's the same in the national park.
Okay, so how have you looked at future trends and what the impact of does the past reflect the future, and what new plan might what impact that might have on future trends? Or
Not in detail, not in the level of detail that we have, for example, for the Windfall study of our own projections of Windfall development, which is mostly what this is. But really, that is why there is the uncertainty. That will be for the national park to do through their evidence base. As I say, we've taken a cautious estimate, not just projected forward what happened in the past. We've taken a sort of cautious estimate of that. and looked at different.
Why do you
ways.
say it's cautious?
Well, because people always say, oh, well, the supply of windfall sites will start to dry up. I mean, to be honest, we very rarely see it actually happening, but that is the sort of traditional approach, that you apply some sort of discount. And I would just say we're not talking here about the whole of the South Downs National Park, just the part in Winchester.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, when talking about a huge area, we're not talking about that same huge area.
Okay, does anybody else want to say anything about that? Okay. Moving on to the second matter, in accordance with the approach set out in the push position statements and ongoing cooperation with neighbouring authorities, Portsmouth and Havant have confirmed an unmet need. Now, we spoke a lot about that yesterday. Let's not rehearse all of that. Now, I think we know how that unmet needs allowance has been calculated. Could you just summarise it? There are a few people who weren't here yesterday, and then we'll move on to talk about how that figure should be expressed.
So, as I say, the starting point was the standard method, and as advised by the MPPF and the PPG. When we were at the strategic issues and priorities stage, the SIP document, at that stage, Push had just produced its first statement of common ground that had an unmet need snapshot, as we call it, because we've discussed the difficulty of tying this figure down, of around 12,000 dwellings, I think, and had just started work on how to address that. And at that time, the thoughts in Push were that would be met purely by what were called strategic development opportunity areas at the time, major strategic allocations. And that work started off with a long list of, from memory, 20 or 30 potential locations, and that was gradually narrowed down. So at that SIP stage, we did mention that work in the SIP, but the options that were consulted on were just for Winchester's needs, noting that there is an unmet need in Push likely to be met through strategic sites in the south of the district.
Yeah.
We then moved on to the Regulation 19 local plan. Now, at that time, Push still hadn't defined where and how many strategic development opportunity areas there would be. So we were in some, but it was still working on the basis of that was likely to be how the shortfall would be met. And we obviously wanted to do something in the plan to show that we were helping towards meeting that unmet need. And we started a raise within Push and in our local plan. Look, we can't just sit around waiting for these SDOAs to be defined. We ought to be looking at what we can do in our own local plans. Now, when we discussed this the other day, I think it was Flynn portrayed that as the council trying to kick down the road the SDOAs. The truth of the matter is, at that time, we didn't know where they would be, how many, if any, would be in Winchester, what size they were, and all the rest of it. But we took the positive and proactive action of putting well, at that time we called it a buffer, and it was partly to be able to deal with any changes to the standard method, because obviously at that stage we couldn't fix the standard method. So there was the possibility that would change. I think at the time, and as has proved to be the case in practice, it changed downwards, and the buffer was able to get bigger. But it was always intended to be mostly for unmet needs. And I think, again, yesterday that was characterised as, oh, it's been repurposed for unmet needs. It was always intended to be mostly for that, but recognising that the standard method might change. And then when we got to the Regulation 19 local plan, when we were able to fix the standard method, we were able to say, okay, any surplus between the standard method and what we're able to achieve through our preferred development strategy can be allocated purely to unmet needs. And again, it's been suggested, oh, well, that figure only increased. It went from 1,450 in the Reg 18 plan to 1,900, as you'll know. That only happened because the standard method went down a bit. Well, it wasn't just that. We did look positively to see how we could maximise that within the development strategy. So there were new sites allocated at Sutton Scotney, Wickham. Capacity of some sites increased at Courtney Road, Winchester, and Newlands, for example. So it wasn't just a passive, oh well, the standard requirement's gone down a bit, we can achieve a bit more. It was actively trying to do what we could to meet that need. But we fully accept that in an ideal world, if we had an authority next to us saying, well, we're in the same housing market area, we've got a shortfall of X, we say, okay, well, that's got to be added to our need. Whether we can meet it or not is another matter, but that is straightforward. We've got to add it to our need. But in a position we're in, we just cannot come up with a figure. So we've had to say, well, what is the best way of dealing with our own needs and trying to do something on top to help contribute. And if you look at what's been suggested around the table, I mean, and in the statements, very few other participants have tried to put a figure on it, other than referring to the new standard method figures, which is not what we're dealing with. And the best we've got is, for example, O'Flynn saying, oh, well, it's big. I'm going to go for a figure of 8,000. Mr. Young, oh, well, I think more like 20,000, and you can split it between Test Valley, Winchester and East Hampshire. It's pure guesswork, and professionally, I'm not happy to promote that. I accept that our way forward isn't a sort of technically correct version of how you get to the figure, because you can't get to it. But at least it has some validity, and like I say, if the alternatives were before you and being examined and tested, then I certainly don't think they'd perform better than ours.
No. Okay.
Can I just add to that one very brief point about the push strategy?
Yeah.
You'll notice that page 215 of the local plan, which is table H1 we've been looking at. Mm-hmm. In the commentary at 916 and 917, there's discussion of the push strategy. Yeah. Well, that comes with one quite important change, pretty much directly from the most recent push spatial position statement, December 2023, from paras 633 and 634, which set out explicitly the two-stage strategy which push is adopting. And actually, at 633 describes as stage one.
Sorry, what are you looking at there?
Sorry, this is the push position statement.
Yeah.
The document reference is PSH01. It's the December 2023 statement. It's one that everyone was taking the higher numbers from yesterday. It actually says in the short to medium term, the following authorities, which include Winchester, should be able to meet and potentially exceed MPPF 2023 standard method based figures. So not only have we achieved something which was only potentially achievable as Push saw it, but we've followed exactly the strategy that Push has envisaged. And I think it's not just envisaged at some point in the distant past, in their most recent statement of. So I just wanted that in the context of where we've got to be absolutely clear.
I think we dealt with that. I just wanted to make sure that does anybody wish to comment on that? I'm looking particularly for those people who didn't have an opportunity yesterday. There are a few people here. Mr. Clements.
Thank you, Mark. I know we went through this in some detail yesterday, so at the risk of going over old ground, I'll try not to. But it's interesting, just picking up on Mr. Oberchek's comment. He mentioned that their solution is an imperfect solution. Of course, it is an imperfect solution because the statements of common ground on which the unmet need or the apportionment of unmet need are based will no longer actually come into effect, because both of those statements of common ground were predicated on Havant and Portsmouth submitting a plan. Certainly Portsmouth, and the statement of common ground says as much, was anticipating submitting its plan under the transitional provisions. That won't now take place. Havant is less explicit, but they were both based on old standard methodology figures and old standard methodology on that data.
Yeah.
Our statement, there's a table in there, Mom, which I refer you to, which compares the existing situation and then what it would be if those figures were recalibrated. So I won't go over that now. But in terms of an opportunity to rectify that imperfect situation, surely that now exists when we look at what all of the other planning authorities in Hampshire are doing in terms of preparing their plans pursuant to the 2024 local housing need. I've got a list in front of me here and I won't go through it, but they are all, with the exception of Winchester and Fareham, which is yet to confirm its position, all taken from the recently published local development schemes for each authority, all either at Reg 18, well, at Reg 18 stage and anticipating a Reg 19 stage. Sure. Now, surely the forum exists to discuss unmet needs and actually to make a purposive response to it in a coordinated way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Young?
Yeah, I'll just confirm. Yeah, I did say 20,000 yesterday. I mean, dare to be effective for a minute, just a minute, that we might actually solve the housing problems for all the people who never appear at these examinations. Just with that point being made, the refrain is you can't deal with it because nobody's telling us. We're telling you now. We're telling you 20,000. That looks a sensible figure. And I haven't heard the arguments against that when there's 40,000 unmet need just sat there on the south coast. The position is that we're not in an ideal world. A previous past chief planning inspector described the duty to cooperate when it was introduced as the most dismal of inventions. And he was right. You know, it's dismal and we are moving to strategic planning. But we still have to look for solutions. It's not an excuse to say, well, it's a dismal invention. Why is it that there's not a single other local authority sat around this table? I accept that, though I heard all about the putting people in another room, they were allowed in afterwards yesterday. But why are they not here? Why have you not, like the Birmingham inspector, Mr. Clues, invited them to attend here and explain what's happening with their unmet need? And secondly, if they don't do that, you have the power to subpoena, as all inspectors do, these local authorities and ask them to attend. They should be filling these tables, explaining to you what is being done with their unmet need. And at the moment, that's the elephant in the room. They should be here and they should be explaining it, unless, of course, the plan doesn't proceed, because you haven't got an answer. Now, Havant broke cover briefly, but they broke cover and revealed that things were inadequate. But what is Portsmouth's answer to their huge unmet need and Southampton's unmet need? Why are they not here to explain that and explain to you what their solution is? If it isn't to look at those three authorities to the north, of which sat in the middle is Winchester, absolutely screaming, we can take the housing physically, because Southampton can't take it physically, Portsmouth can't take it physically. We all sit here in some sort of artificial vacuum when we don't think about solving it. Duty to cooperate is a duty to discuss, but it is also a soundness issue to be effective. And at the moment, this plan is, as everybody around the table, apart from the local authority, saying is completely ineffective.
Okay.
So 20,000, that's, if there's any doubt about that, that's what we're saying. 20,000 houses missing from this plan.
Okay, thank you. Home Builders Federation?
Thank you, Mark. I think there's 2 points. There is obviously moving forward in terms of what that unmet need will be, and I think we've just heard from Mr. Young in terms of what that potential will be. I think looking at the point at which, and this is the council saying, oh, it's uncertain, they did have some certainty in terms of December 2023 when the position statement was published, showing that there was a shortfall of 11,000 homes across that South Hampshire area. So that was the point at which there was some certainty. One would expect that the council would have known prior to that December 2023, hopefully through duty to cooperate discussions with the likes of Havant and Portsmouth as to what that would be. So I think from that point at which they're preparing this plan, there was a clear a level of unmet need that was there. And then moving forward, obviously with the changes to national policy, that has just increased, and I think that has grown, and I think that's so. We've got from that point, but then it just hasn't got smaller, but no attempt has been made then to revisit that, to put that back into the process, to understand actually, could we do more? And I think that's the problem. I think that's what the points we were making yesterday, Mark.
Yeah, I know.
It's that difficult point of saying, oh, we weren't sure, when there was certainty, and actually that's more certainty should have been sought through the duty to cooperate. And that's where I think the failure was between the Regulation 18 and Regulation 19. There wasn't that clarity, and I think that's where it fails, let alone what the future is going to hold in terms of the significant level of unmet need, given that Portsmouth don't have the land to sort of increase in, let alone Southampton and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brent. O'Flynn? Sorry, I don't want to rehearse all the arguments that we had yesterday, but it's an important. But yesterday we dealt with the duty to cooperate. I want to know what the soundness issue with that is now, please. O'Flynn, please. You've got your nameplate around the wrong way, but I think I know it now.
So I think just a few things, and it's really, I think, responding to Mr. Optic's a helpful summary of, in a sense, the process, which I think has sort of, in a sense, crystallised really where we've got to. I think the first point is around this sort of seeming deferring the solving of the problem to the PFSH process, as if the council is a sort of passive sort of outsider to that process, and we'll wait for that PFSH to sort of do the job and tell us what we do or don't have to do before we can act. Winchester City Council is part of the PFSH. It sits at the table. And for as long as there has been a clear unmet need figure, either to be solved by SDOAs or not, the council has been aware that it is sitting on SHLA submissions totaling 42,000 homes a year. At what point did it ever sit at the PFSH table and say, yeah, we've got this unmet need problem. Good news, lads. We've got a potential solution here. It's in sites that have been submitted to our local plan that are identified as suitable, available and achievable and could start delivering within 5 years. And that input to the process never happened. It was deferred to an SDOA process, which for Winchester's part of it produced a site that the council says, well, couldn't even contemplate allocating it because we don't have any evidence on it. To multiple ownerships, etc. So this sort of challenge around, oh, we couldn't do it because PFSH just doesn't stack up to my mind. The second point is around timing, and it's that sort of point of, well, by the time we realised this plan should be doing something, it was too late.
Yeah.
And we thought the SDOAs were the solution. Well, if you read the housing topic paper, January 25. It refers to the para 414 to 416. Effectively refers to, describes a chronology of going through 2021 and before the period to December 2022. And it says it was becoming clear that new SDOAs may not be able to address all the unmet needs as had previously been thought. And the assessment would not be concluded in time to allocate within the plan, and then refers to the December 22 update, alluded to SDAs not meeting shortfalls fully. So, at December 2022, 18 months before the council ink dried on the Reg 19 plan, it knew there was a shortfall. It knew it had 42,000 homes in its SHLA that it could have looked at and tested as an option, and it didn't do. It defies credibility. In 18 months, in reality longer, the council couldn't have lifted the lid off the Sheila box and explore whether it had opportunities to do things if it concluded the SDOAs weren't sufficient. And that fundamentally goes to the point of soundness. It's why the PPG tells plan makers to explore all available options. And it's not an answer for the council to say, well, nobody else has told us what those options are. It's their job. You know, they are the plan maker. They're supposed to come up with options. Most other local authorities do it. They identify a scale of needs. It's notional. It's there to test the option and work out what's achievable. And that exercise, I'm afraid, just hasn't been done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lenham?
Thank you. I think it's worth just pointing out the status of the spatial position statement.
Yes.
It's not a statutory document, and it's very clear in the foreword of that document that it's not intended as an upper tier plan, which future plans will need to conform. So this idea that it was setting or it's required to set some kind of upper strategy with which then Winchester complies and haven't had time to do so, quite frankly, is a bit of a nonsense. It's there as a mechanism for some joint working and a mechanism to take a coordinated approach, but it's not an upper tier plan and it's not subject to examination. It's not something that's even subject to consultation, quite frankly. None of us around this room have ever had opportunity to comment on that strategy. It's for this process to test what's being said there, and it's for this process and the local plan process to test in full the options available to meet both the district's own need and, so far as practical, which is the positively prepared test, the unmet needs from neighbouring areas. They knew from the statement of common ground what that unmet need from neighbouring areas is, never ever sought to test it. Again, the allowance just a fallout of some additional capacity that they found from the preferred strategy to deal with Winchester only need. So they haven't been positively prepared in that sense. And I completely agree with what's just been said in terms of why on earth didn't they go and look again at the Schlar sites and see what additional capacity there was?
This is, we're going over ground that we covered yesterday. Okay. Crowders?
Thank you. Just one small point following on from both of the previous speakers and perhaps foreshadowing one point in the debate we're going to have in the morning, which is that, just coming back to your question, how has the unmet needs allowance and the plan been calculated? Well, I think it's quite clear it hasn't been calculated. It's a repurposing of a surplus or a buffer. Now,
we did that yesterday.
We dealt with that yesterday, and what we are going to deal with tomorrow is supply, and of course the issue of whether there is sufficient supply and a buffer built in is going to come up in that discussion, and this 1900 is being stretched in all directions at the moment. So it's just the one point I want to raise for now.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything that the council wishes to respond on that point?
Perhaps if I can kick off, Mark. I mean, just on the scale of the need, the latest snapshot we have of that is the push spatial position statement. That is based on the version of the standard method and the MPPF that we are dealing with in examining this plan. So that is the relevant, or the most relevant shortfall to be looking at, the 11,771. And in the housing topic paper update, EDO2, table 3 in that sets out how that shortfall could be met, indeed exceeded, if we were carrying on with existing plans that were being produced.
Sorry, what page is that?
It starts on page 18 of EDO2.
Thank you.
And it looks
Got that.
Various, the 5 districts that are named as being potentially able to exceed their requirements. And as I said yesterday, although other districts may fall short of their needs, they will be providing additional supply through their emerging local plans, which hasn't been taken into account in that shortfall figure. The only other thing I think to address is the Sheila issue. What's happened there is there are various landowners who are putting swathes of farmland as potential Sheila sites, which may be available because they've been promoted, may theoretically be suitable because they haven't got any high level constraints, but are actually totally unsuitable for development in terms of achieving sustainable development. Now, where they fell within the push area and where they amounted to, where they exceeded the threshold of 500 dwellings potential, they were actually considered as strategic development opportunity areas. So all of those were put forward through push, and we fully accept push strategy isn't statutory, and that is the reason we weren't able to just take the east of Botley area and plonk it into the local plan, and we're still not able to do that. And in terms of the timing, O'Flynn say we knew in December 2022 that there was an issue, the SDOAs weren't going to solve the problem fully. Yes, we did, and we'd already published the Reg 18 plan at that time with a buffer in it of 1450. What we haven't really covered very much is, the between the Reg 18 and the Reg 19, which we're being criticised a lot for, and people are saying, well, you could have done more. I think we have covered the reason why it's not realistic to include the east of Botley SDOA. It's just a broad area of search, as it's now called, because it is a broad area on which very little work has been done by either the landowners, us, or push in terms of master planning. So it wasn't realistic to put that into the local plan without considerable delays to the local plan. But one thing that I don't think we really got a chance to respond to yesterday was this accusation, which has come up again about, oh, well, haven't in their original statement of common ground said we hadn't responded positively in terms of duty to cooperate, or words to that effect. What was happening between the Reg 18 and the Reg 19 plan is we were producing statements of common ground with all our neighbours, including Hammond. So we were discussing and fully aware of what their needs were. They wrote formally to ask us to assist, and we responded. But until we actually got to approving the Reg 19 plan, we couldn't say to Hammond, oh yes, we're actually going to be increasing our buffer to help further with that, because that hadn't been approved. So there was little we could have done until the Reg 19 plan came out, when it did respond. And also Hammond's key concern wasn't the quantum, it's the fact that it wasn't allocated to them. That I think is what they meant when they said Winchester hasn't cooperated fully on this, because we hadn't allocated it specifically to them at that time, which we now have, and that terminology has gone.
Okay.
Can I just make a couple of points to add to that?
Yes.
Very briefly. In answer to the question whether it's rhetorical or not, I don't really know as to why Portsmouth and Havant aren't here around this table. It's because they both signed statement of common ground,
I don't need help.
in which they explicitly say that on the basis of the apportionment that's been arrived at, that the Winchester local plan would be positively prepared and effective. They both take that view and they've expressed that publicly. Secondly, it's probably right to notice that the statements of common ground, whilst expressing a percentage split, envisage that following this examination, that percentage split will then be reduced to actual numbers, because the other calls upon the 1900 units which may come forward through this examination will be assessed, and that table H2 will be able to be updated with specific numbers. That's envisaged. Now, whether that becomes possible, that's what's envisaged in the statements of common ground. The other point to make is to respond to Blenheim, and just to say that one shouldn't lightly dismiss what Push has said. It's a cooperative working body trying to solve a very difficult sub-regional issue. And yes, whilst Winchester contributes, it's around that table. It's by no means, of course, the only participant. And whilst the document doesn't have statutory status, it's explicitly intended to help inform, I'm now reading directly from the forward, help inform the preparation of and strategic coordination of local plans. and I'm not going to repeat what I said about the strategy that's set out there, but it shouldn't be as lightly dismissed as some would seem to want to do.
Thank you for that. Okay, last go. Please don't repeat anything that's been said.
No, I'm not going to. It's just a couple of points on Mr. Oberchik's response to my points. On the idea that for example, the Botley SDOA, it suddenly became apparent that actually, it wasn't a master plan, it was a blurred area. We didn't know, it wasn't tested for delivery. That because the council's party to the PFSH process, it was party to the methodology in which the SDOAs were going to be identified and tested. So it would have known, or rather the outputs and lack of specificity in the SDOA work would have been known about and expected before that actually output was produced. So, positive planning would have meant at the very least taking a contingency view of saying, well, what happens if the SDOA process doesn't generate the outputs that we hope it to achieve? So that wasn't there. The second point is around the point that sites that the SHLA considers suitable aren't in fact suitable and aren't sustainable. Where is the evidence for that? And where is the testing against Para 11? Because Para 11 is the method in which you decide whether something is sustainable or not. And that exercise hasn't been carried out in the context of the need part of the equation. And the final point is, to give you a reference, is in the PPG on housing and economic land availability assessment, paragraph 25, which basically says that what happens if there are insufficient sites or broad locations to meet needs. It says, in the first instance, policymaking authorities will need to revisit their assessment, for example, to carry out a further call for sites or changing assumptions about development potential particular sites. So in other words, you've got to go back and just look at it again. It just didn't happen.
Okay, we covered that yesterday. Melway?
Thank you. I've actually got two hats. So if I put my YMCA hat on, Fairfield Manor Group, so, thanks. Had to. They own land east of Botley. And I'd just like to give you some context that we submitted a pre-application to the council on the 13th of November 2020. We had a pre-app response on the 19th of August 2021. And in an email we wrote in seeking an allocation on this land, and 27th of October 2021, the response from the officer was, "Thank you for your email. At present, I can only offer advice in respect of the existing local plans, as the emerging local plan is still in early stages and far from being adopted." So it's in response to Oberchik that it would have been too difficult to bring these SDOAs forward. We in the industry were maybe ahead of the game, but we were open and willing to bring it forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Persimmon? Sorry, could you please use the microphone? Thank you.
It's in relation to Den 1, which I know we're discussing on other matters, but it's relevant here. So we've heard about the fact that the council have looked at the Sheila sites and considered they're not suitable. But Den 1 is in relation to a neighbourhood plan area where they're not the council aren't looking to allocate sites themselves, they're reliant on the neighbourhood plan area. But they have given a number of houses to that area, 100 houses. But it's equally unclear how that number has been reached in terms of the evidence base, in terms of how they reached the 100 houses number to be allocated to it, which links to what's been said around the Sheila sites, and that there's plenty of opportunity to potentially allocate more sites through the neighbourhood plan process. The neighbourhood plan groups have looked at lots of sites. There's the potential for bigger sites, more sites to come forward in that area, and there's no indication of how Winchester reached that number. Given the location of Denmead, obviously the closest large settlement to both Havant and Portsmouth, you would think that would have been a target for looking for potential to meet more unmet need within that location.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Young?
We acknowledge that neighbouring authorities have not argued that there is a failure to meet the duty to cooperate. The words of Inspector Helen Hockenhall and Thomas Hatfield last month on the Bournemouth plan. You don't need them to object. Of course, the authorities all help each other by agreeing not to object to each other's plans. But what they then go on to say is the development industry representatives did object, and we did. What is important, they remind everyone, what is important is the actions of the council during the preparation of the plan to engage with neighbouring authorities and the evidence that this has been done constructively, actively and ongoing. Where is the solution to the unmet need to the south? It's not enough that no authorities don't object. We all know why they don't object. It's all, quite obvious why they don't object. So they don't object to each other. But that's not the answer, as these two inspectors quite rightly and quite properly identified. You've got no answer to all that unmet need, no answer at all. It sits there. They were dealing with a 2023 plan, a 2023 version of the MPPF, just as you are. The Bournemouth plan only dealt with 54% of the current standard method figure. This one only deals with 58. The parallels are absolutely startling.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Young. Okay, it's now 3:15. I'm going to take a break now and we'll come back at 4:25. Thank you very much. It's now 4:25 and this hearing is resumed. Can we move on to question 3, please? And it's still dealing with the unmet allowance. And it's about the way in which that is expressed. So it might be helpful if the council just explain. We've got a proposed modification to the plan, and it might be helpful if the council just give us the background to that. We've covered some of it already, particularly. So if the council could just outline that, please. We've got suggested modifications, and that's to apportion a percentage of need to, firstly to Havant and then to Portsmouth on a 30/70 basis, and that's the percentage figure.
Yeah, so the way we've approached the unmet need, or at least initially, was that what we're trying to do is help meet unmet needs in the South Hampshire housing market area, and that equates very well to the push area. We've followed the advice of the MPPF, paragraph 61, that any needs that cannot be met within neighbouring areas should be taken into account in establishing the amount of housing to be planned for. So we've added them to the standard, we've added the unmet needs allowance to the standard method figure. But that doesn't say in the location of the housing, in the sites. There's no requirement to name sites or locations. But what we did get through consultation and working on statements of common ground with Portsmouth and Havant in particular, was a concern that they want, and I think it's understandable from their point of view, they wanted to be able to point to an amount of provision that we were helping them to meet. Our concern about that was we viewed that unmet need allowance as being a general one, and there may be other authorities that pop up, or the South Downs, or there may be changes to the numbers that mean that any number that we gave Havant or Portsmouth may need to be updated. The compromise we agreed on was a percentage, and in that modification that shows that if the unmet need figure was 1900, that shows how that would be split. As our council has said, once the examination is over and the housing numbers are settled, and we know which authorities' needs we're providing for, we would be happy to include a number for those authorities once the numbers are all finalised. But we still have a disagreement with Portsmouth about whether we ought to be identifying sites. And we don't believe that's necessary. It's not a soundness or duty to cooperate matter. It's just an area where we disagree with the approach. And in fact, we've had varying advice from the planning inspector at the preliminary meetings with, or advisory meetings with PINs. So that's where we are.
Okay, so what you've done is you've included a percentage figure. Does that give enough certainty? I mean, you can't, you've said that you don't want to allocate specific sites and you've identified what the problem with that would be, but does that give enough certainty?
Well, as you said, once all the figures are finalised, we can turn that into a number for each authority. And,
But it will just be Havant Portsmouth.
Well, unless anyone else comes along in the meantime. But the guidance doesn't require us to do more than that.
Yeah, but the plan already says 30% of 1900 and 70% of 1900 is to Havant and Portsmouth. But you're now suggesting that if other authorities come forward, then that might change.
That was the reason we didn't want to tie it down initially. I think, at this stage, we should limit it to those authorities that have come forward. Yeah. And as I say, we could turn that into a number once we finalise the numbers, if it is 1900 or whatever the number ends up being.
Which will be when they sort out their emerging plans.
Well, no, I mean, when we've sorted out the number in our plan, when we know if it is 1900 or whatever the number it is, then we can say, okay, that equates to 30% is such a figure.
Oh, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay, and should a review mechanism be in the plan then for that figure? Any sort of a review if that figure is going to be adjusted?
Well, I think given that we'd be starting immediately on a review of the local plan anyway, then we hadn't put that forward.
Okay, can I hear from people around the table, please, on the way in which this figure is expressed in the plan? Ms. Mulliner?
Thank you. Just looking at the statement of common grounds as a starting point across the partnership with South Hampshire authorities, paragraph 3.19, the specific housing requirements for each local PSSH local authority will be determined in individual local plans with the appropriate housing figures and locations for development tested in local plan examinations. Two things there. We don't know what the appropriate housing figure is, because we don't know what the unmet need figure actually is. We've just heard there's uncertainty about it. It might be 1,900, South Downs more likely to go on 1,800. It could be less because we don't know what other flexibility in the plan. We haven't heard about land supply yet and other flexibility. So one, we don't know what the unmet housing need figure being tested actually in this plan. And we don't know what the location for the development to meet that unmet need is. So in terms of the statement of common grounds, this authority are just not meeting the terms of that.
Sorry, which bit?
This is SD08H.
Sorry, which one is it, please?
The partnership between Partnership for South Hampshire authorities. So Partnership for South Hampshire Statement of Common Ground.
What's the reference for that, please?
SD08H.
Okay.
And it's paragraph 3.19.
Thank you. Vistry.
Thank you, Ma'am. Just continuing with Ms. Mulliner's point, the Portsmouth Statement of Common Ground SD08I is based on a specific percentage split between Portsmouth and Havant. So that's the basis for the agreement, as is, and it's the same with the Havant agreement. It's only a very brief point. But if that is then going to be broken down further with the 1900, which is Winchester's figure, it's not anybody else's figure, it's Winchester's figure. If that's going to be broken down and apportioned to others, potentially, presumably these statements of common ground, which I've said earlier are not effective anyway, would be less effective, would fall away. So the agreement on which the council is making much at this examination, those agreements would fall away in any event. It seems a highly unsatisfactory way of approaching this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to add anything to the way in which that figure is expressed? Mr. Young?
Yeah, I mean, why is it that number? What's that? What's it based on? What relevance does it have to the scale of the need? But what is it based on? It's just a figure they think is presumably politically acceptable. That's all it is. It's got no evidential basis. It doesn't seek to address all of the relevant authorities. It doesn't seek to even identify where that might be. I mean, a reason why you might say we're going to take 1900 is because we've got our own constraints that prevent us from achieving anything else, because we've got extensive flooding, we've got road congestion issues. We don't. There's no reasoning behind that figure to justify what it is, as we've made clear. These three authorities to this, it won't be New Forest, so the three authorities to the north need to take around 40,000. And I know it said we should work off the standard method figures for the 2023 version of the MPPF. It's just this plan that's allowed through the transitional arrangements. That unmet need is the figure it is now. Why are they not seeking to address that? But in any event, when you're dealing with cities like Southampton, they had a 35% uplift. I mean, we're not coming anywhere close. And throughout the entire process, it's never been less than 10,000 in the last however many years it's been, the last few years, never less than 10,000. So why is one of the most obvious donor authorities only seeking to deal with 1,900? It doesn't make any sense. No evidential basis.
No, I've got that point. Yes, has the council got anything to say on that? Yes, on that point.
Only really to say that this idea that other authorities who have all signed statements of common ground will come forward when now seeking a portion of that 1900 figure, or what it eventually emerges to be, seems to be fairly fanciful at this stage. And Havant and Portsmouth have again agreed statement of common ground, as I've already said, accepting the plan positively prepared on that basis. And again, to be absolutely clear, the statements of common ground envisage that at the conclusion of this examination, they will be given actual figures. So if it's a want of actual numbers, which is of concern to you or is interest to you, well, that's actually not a concern at all, because the idea is that there will be actual numbers.
Okay, I'm going to, the whole issue of unmet need is one that I need to consider and come to a conclusion on. Flynn?
No, I don't really, in a sense, have any sort of skin in the game on this, but just a thought occurred to me, which may or may not be helpful, is of why it might be helpful to, having decided that there is an amount of unmet need and you allocate sites, to hypothecate, at least in planning terms, the sites that are contributing to that. And that's the scenario where, let's say the local council doesn't, for whatever reason, prepare its replacement local plan, and in 5 years after adoption, it reverts to the standard method figure, which is its own housing need figure for 5-year land supply purposes. And one then has to say, well, what is the supply that contributes towards its standard method housing need figure. The council and everybody would need some way to, and part of that supply was a site that was allocated, or an amount of land that was allocated pursuant to unmet needs. You would need to understand which sites to discount from the supply so that you could be confident that you were not double counting sites, if you like, because Portsmouth might have a plan that was up to date where its requirement figure was lower, predicated on as unmet need being met. But then 5 years after the Winchester plan becomes out of date, suddenly it goes, oh, we'll have that to meet our standard method need figure. So essentially you've lost some of that unmet need has kind of fallen between the cracks. I think from memory, that sort of situation arose in an appeal in central beds relating to an Edge of Luton site where the central, so it had been allocated in the central beds plan to meet unmet needs from Luton. The central beds plan became out of date and they tried to then counter against their own local LHN figure. And the inspector in that case said, no, you can't do that because the only reason that site's there is to meet Luton's need, not yours. So I think the end process is you probably do need to identify some land that's allocated for unmet need and say, this is the site that's allocated for unmet need, so you don't double count it. It's the simple point.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay, I think, you know, we've heard a lot about the unmet needs and it's sort of asking the question in a different way. So I'm going to leave it there and I'll consider that and come to a conclusion. Okay. The next question that I have is in relation to the neighbourhood plan designated areas. Could the council just outline their approach to the neighbourhood areas, please, and the strategic policies that indicate what the strategic policy should do and what they indicate, please?
Thank you. Plan outlines identifies particularly 3 areas with neighbourhood plan designations in the allocations section: Newlsford, Denmead, and Hursley.
Yeah.
The approach is to really identify specifically where appropriate. We'll return to that. A housing target where that's been sought through the neighbourhood plan to identify suitable sites to deliver a quantum of development, as well as where is also considered appropriate series of principles or other matters that should be considered in effect by the neighbourhood plan group when they bring that plan forward. So that's the approach that's been followed. There is some different sort of approach that's outlined in the participant statement, which is about the circumstances of each neighbourhood plan area. For instance, they are allocated a level of development. The starting point was the categorisation of that settlement within the settlement hierarchy that we've discussed in the previous matter. That then, through those discussions, I think we said that was a starting point for a certain level of expectation: 100 to 120 homes, 90 to 100 homes. Those discussions, in line with other discussions with other areas, that has resulted in effect 100 homes being sought in both Denmead and in Newlsford. The position at Hursley is slightly different because of the timings of their neighbourhood plan that in effect already had made, we thought, sufficient progress that it was not appropriate to go back and seek them to stop and restart their process seeking a similarly appropriate level, which we would normally have done of 50 to 60 homes. So instead, the plan sets forward, if you like, a minimum expectation, which is based on Windfall Plus, which is where we are with Hersley. So Hersley has not been set a target, but it is recognised in the plan that that the neighbour plan is coming through. They have made a level of progress, and you can see on their website they are actually assessing and allocating, considering sites at this moment.
But these aren't set at, we come back to spot, these aren't set as minimums, are they?
No.
Sorry, you just said, did I misunderstand you there?
Forgive me, was it with reference to Hersley?
Yeah.
Yes, forgive me. What I mean by that, and I may have misspoke, if so, apologies. What I meant by that was that the figure in the plan in terms of its supply, the description of Hersley in the table is for 20 homes envisaged to come forward either through Windfall or in effect small scale allocations in response to local needs. But that is, you won't see that elsewhere listed in housing supply because it is in effect part of the overall Windfall figure for policy H1.
I understand. Does anybody wish to say anything about this point about strategic policies and what they should say in relation to neighbourhood plans and what will come forward? Blenheim?
Yeah, thank you. Just maybe a bit of clarity. I mean, I feel like it is also a sort of an approach that might make assumptions on what might happen. So if I just look at New Osford, I think they provided a new update not too long ago on their process, and they're saying they're seeking to allocate in the region of 100 homes, though this figure might vary depending on the local context. So they haven't really gone through a design process themselves either. And from experience, these design processes tend to reduce the scale with other factors coming in like BNG, open space, infrastructure, etc. So what we might see is that the neighborhood plan will have a smaller number of units coming forward. And Denmead, the other one, just looking at the site that they're proposing to allocate as well, just on brief high-level review, looks like it has significant access issues. So I'm again not convinced if and how those 100 units per neighborhood area will actually be met. So I think it's one of those where maybe a bit more evidence would be helpful.
So, sorry, are you questioning whether the sites will come forward in the neighbourhood plans?
I'm questioning if there is certainty that these 100 units that are being alluded to in both of those neighbourhood plan areas will come forward.
And is that on the basis of whether the neighbourhood plans will come forward?
Whether the neighbourhood plans come forward if those sites are deemed deliverable, and if they are deemed deliverable to the extent that the council is seeking to.
I think you've answered this in your topic paper, but could you just respond to that, whether the certainty around the delivery of neighbourhood plans?
Sure. In our development strategy and site selection topic paper, it goes through settlement by settlement and how we've arrived at the figure for that settlement and then the process for selecting sites. Obviously, the neighbourhood plan areas of New Osford and Denmead are dealt with in a different way, but those sections for those settlements do outline the number of sites already in our Sheila and the capacity associated with those that in both cases exceed the level of development anticipated through the local plan policy. So that gives us comfort at this stage that level of development will be delivered. Obviously, the parishes, the neighbourhood plan groups will be doing their own processes, and they may well supplement that source with other sites as that runs through. But at this stage, we feel we have sufficient evidence to show there are sites for a meaningful choice and a meaningful consideration of options by the parishes as they bring forward the neighbourhood plans.
And then what you're saying in relation to the progress of the neighbourhood plans, that you've looked at that and you've given evidence on whether they would be coming forward.
Yes, it's in the participant statement. Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, there's more recent evidence on the participant
Yes.
statement for this
Yes.
matter, yes.
Okay, I understand that. And so 67 does speak about strategic policies. Are those requirements wrapped up in strategic policies for neighbourhood plans?
The overall housing figures are in strategic policy because that's in
H1.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that is and H3. Sorry,
H3.
the neighbourhood plan policies themselves aren't
No, so it
strategic
doesn't say.
policies.
Yeah.
It is envisaged they will form the context in which those neighbourhood plans are brought forward and be relevant for those examinations. Those processes. There is an argument. There's been some discussion about whether those neighbourhood plan allocations, particularly for Denmead and Newellsford, should be strategic policies. It wasn't clear whether it was helpful or hindering those processes as they ran through. What we feel is more important is the backstopping. If those levels of development don't come forward for whatever reason in those parishes, we were always talking about potential further DPD or something, but obviously since then things have moved on. We're in the realm of a new plan review in any event. So if the parishes fail to make sufficient progress in these neighbourhood plans, this can be swept up in that plan review that we'll be getting underway later this year.
Okay, thank you. I've got it.
That's all right. Wait.
Wait.
Peter Canavan, Carter Jonas. I think the short answer is yes, it should be in the strategic plan. The number at least should be in H3. So then the neighbourhood plans are in no doubt as to what they're trying to achieve as a minimum. And as was talked about earlier, that should be expressed as a minimum, and then abouts can be considered through the development management process. I think we've just had lots of answers there to questions that are going to be asked later on through site allocations. So I'm not sure how much to respond to here about whether it's the right number and whether it's the right fallback. And I think the short answer is that, as was mentioned yesterday, we don't really have the evidence and justification for the number, as in, you know, the why 100 and New Alresford is left to allocation. But again, we're going to come back to that. And I think the fallback position is reasonable, and the review is important, but that too needs to be thought about the deliverability of these sites. But in short, there does need to be a number in a strategic plan and in a strategic policy, excuse me. H3 is the right policy for it to be in, and it needs to be expressed as a minimum.
Okay, thank you. Alfred Holmes.
Thank you, Ma'am. Chris Rees, Alfred Holmes. If it assists you, Ma'am, I've been heavily involved with the neighbourhood plan in New Alresford for the last 18 months. In respect to the sites coming forward, there's ample opportunities to easily meet 100 units that's there. The town council has employed ACOM as their consultancy, so they've been reviewing all of the site opportunities. There was a large-scale neighbourhood consultation last November, so there's a lot of ongoing work at the moment to explore the opportunities and constraints of all of the sites there.
Yeah, and that's it in the evidence. Okay. Does the council want to add anything to that? Yes, Persimmon.
I've also been involved on behalf of Persimmon Homes with the neighbourhood plan group. So again,
I'm sorry, could you speak up?
Like Mr. Rees, I've also been involved with the Denmead neighbourhood plan group, and can confirm that they've also appointed ACOM to assist them with their neighbourhood plan, and we're the preferred site within Persimmon site is the preferred site within the neighbourhood plan as well. I just wanted to pick up, and it might be something that's more appropriate for the other matters as well, but like I said earlier, the 100 homes number within the strategic policy H2 and H3, by Denmead in particular, it's not clear how that's been arrived at. I understand that that's come about partly through the assessment hierarchies, which I know has been discussed before. But I think Denmead is it's clearly different to New Alresford, for example, in so much as it's very close to the settlements of Portsmouth, Waterlooville, and the various facilities that are in those locations. And without wishing to use the unmet need word again, I think given its Denmead's location unique compared to the other settlements with a neighbourhood plan, it's in a more appropriate location to be able to deliver some of that housing towards some of that need. So I question how the 100 homes for Denmead has been reached and whether that should be a higher number.
Okay, thank you for that. Could you just confirm how those figures were reached for the particular area?
Yes, sure. So we've covered the settlement hierarchy previously, and in that case, New Alresford was classified as a market town and Denmead as a larger rural.
Sorry, would you?
Forgive me, I was looking down. Sorry. New Alresford was categorised as a market town and Denmead as a larger rural settlement. As part of our distribution of development, that refined option 1A that arose following the SIP consultation, that assigned a certain level of development in the market town's rural area, and it was considered appropriate for that categorisation of settlement that these figures were delivered. In the case where neighbourhood plans were at a point where we felt we could engage with them and those groups were willing to include housing allocations in them, then that has resulted in the figures you see there. But the basic premise, of course, is the level of development, albeit contested, for each categorisation of settlement should be the same whether you are having your sites allocated through this plan or through a neighbourhood plan process. And further details in that development strategy and site selection background paper about the work that was done in terms of the availability of land and that sort of thing in specific sites across the piece. The only other thing while I'm speaking I wanted to clarify is that, and apologies if it wasn't quite clear, but the housing allocation for each of these neighbourhood plans is in a strategic policy, because that's in H3 and I believe H2. What I was discussing, what I mentioned earlier, and regret doing now, but was whether DEN1 and NA1 should be strategic policies or not, because they have additional elements in them relating to aims that we expect those neighbourhood plans to follow. On balance, we think maybe not, frankly, because we're not sure about unintended consequences for those neighbourhood plans through their process. And so we think that it may be better off of all those additional elements remain more, if you like, in the mix as influencing factors rather than strategic policies. But frankly, the critical thing for us is the number, and that is in strategic policy H3.
Okay. And what would be those unintended consequences that you're concerned about?
It's the extent to which that may present issues through those neighbourhood plan examinations if those processes take them in ways which perhaps need a refinement to the vision in this local plan or some other matter. In effect, really what I'm talking about is unknowns. So I wouldn't like to go through too much of this. It's just we don't know where that might take us and might rue that decision, frankly.
Okay. Okay. Okay, then we've covered everything that I wanted to cover in this session. Now, quite unusually, we do have a little bit of time. I set out a number of questions. Does anybody want to address any of those in particular? Okay, could I turn to the Home Builders Federation?
Thank you, Mark. It's actually just a quick point. I think it's with regard to your question 6. I think it was referred to by the council in terms of
can I just get that?
The effectiveness of an adjustment for minimum housing requirement to help deliver affordable housing. I think it's a point raised by Mr. Neame in terms of the difficulties in terms of delivering affordable housing and the affordability of the area. And I think it was referenced by the council, by Mr. Opachik, in terms of our statement and the 70% affordable housing delivery in terms of 106. I think it's just showing that it is an effective increasing that requirement
Oh,
to deliver is a very effective way of delivering the affordable housing, in terms of you need the market housing coming forward in order to ensure the delivery of those affordable units. So it's really just clarifying that point. I probably should have made it at the time in terms of that, but we sort of scooted through to unmet need and things. But I think it is an important one to realise that if you don't deliver, you don't increase the delivery of market housing, you're not going to bring forward the affordable.
It's in your reps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burren. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Mel. I wanted to speak to question number 7, which is to do with the tenure and mix of the housing policy. And in particularly, I want to speak about older people's housing, which is included within policy H5 as a category.
And we will be dealing with, obviously, we'll be dealing with the detail of the housing policies later on. It's the headlines at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to just say is that there's clearly a significant need for older people's housing. The SHMA is really clear on this. If you go through, there's table 4.3 where it kind of identifies that 62% of the changing households is all to do with over 65s. A lot of the tables within here are showing the population change, which is mostly over 65s. There's quite a lot of information within here pointing to the need for additional older people's housing, and I think there is a clear need for this, but the delivery of it I don't think gets the emphasis it needs within the plan, given the importance of this provision. The policy H5 at the moment talks about delivering older people's housing within sites of 50 plus. And not to repeat our representations, man, but you'll see within that the difficulties in delivering older people's housing as part of housing sites and competing with the market in able to deliver that. And we also draw attention to the Mayfield report, which deals with how to best provide for elder people's housing going forward, and including care provision within it, so the extra care provision. And clearly just having a kind of tag onto policy H5 to deliver as part of overall housing allocations, I don't think is an effective way in which to meet that need.
So what are you suggesting? What's the change?
So I think policy H5 should have a specific requirement for older people's housing.
Yeah. Okay.
The SHMA does talk about the requirements of that, and I think it's a paragraph 5.36 talks about the net need of 547 extra care and nursing home spaces, and there's nothing within the policies which would suggest that that is being met. So we would look to see the evidence within SHMA brought into the policies, and so that there is a figure which could be measured through the local plan process.
Are you coming to the session on the housing policies?
If it's matter 11, I am.
Yeah. Okay, we'll deal with that in more detail. Blore?
On the issue of the affordable housing, it's greenfield sites that deliver affordable housing. That is just a truism. And the fact is that we can see that where there have been sites in Winchester which have been granted planning permission, they're delivering significant amounts of affordable housing, greenfield sites, for precisely that reason. But going forward, the plan has only got one greenfield site for 150 homes in a settlement which is head and shoulders above everything else. I mean, it's just completely counterintuitive. So the affordable housing supply will dry up probably in the first 5 years of the plan, and there'll be no more affordable housing in Winchester. And at the moment, the average house price, I think I saw at 650,000, something just eye-watering. It becomes a dysfunctional place to live when people have to commute in from elsewhere to come and serve everybody on the high street with their lattes and their pizzas. So the fact that you haven't got greenfield site in such a prominent main town as part of the plan is completely disastrous. Brownfield site, I mean, I've advised on the site behind us, the bus, I think 15 years ago. Whether that ever happens is perhaps for another session. But brownfield sites always struggle with that. So the affordable housing delivery the government now wants, you know, most of my clients, including this one, deliver generally at around 40 and 50%. That's what greenfield sites do. You get virtually nothing on brownfield sites.
No, take that point. Wait.
Thank you. I was the other party to reference the 70% on through section 106, and I think the reason that I raised it really was to highlight a way of identifying, albeit a theoretical housing requirement that could have been tested, and that was a gap then in the housing targets that were tested through the SA and matters like that. Back of an envelope, admittedly, but it took you to 1,400 houses a year. Could have been tested, could have been considered, because it was an uplift to the LHN and wasn't. I just wanted to add that to what was said. And then the other thing was just to touch back very quickly on H3, is that it could be made clearer in there what the neighbourhood plan targets ought to be.
Okay. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to say? Okay, it's now 1:15. Oh, I'm sorry. Forward, thank you.
Sorry, thank you. It was just going back to sort of how those housing numbers were calculated. And again, we might have covered it, or it might not be the most appropriate place to say it, but it was just that there are, so the local plan states that there's smaller intermediate rural settlements should have, paragraph 9.28 of the local plan states that the smaller intermediate rural settlements have modest housing provision as they...
Sorry, where are you?
Sorry, I'm looking at paragraph 9.28, the local plan.
Okay.
It states, it's basically just giving a justification behind some of the numbers. So the smaller intermediate rural settlements have modest housing completions as they do not benefit from significant commitments or completions. So I think as we set out in our representations, we just suggest that this is a misguided approach, as a growth strategy should be focused on actually considering whether a settlement is sustainable and a suitable place for growth, rather than just basing on what's happened there previously.
And it's coming back to the same point that we were discussing about a plan that's reliant on completions and existing commitments. Okay. Okay, then now it's 4:15 and this hearing session is closed, and we will see everyone tomorrow. Sorry? Sorry, in terms of tomorrow, we want to go through supply. We can give the headlines on, you know, whether sites are developable, whether they're deliverable. We'll be dealing with other things in terms of the appropriateness or otherwise of those sites when we deal with it in the meetings.
We'll rely, Mum, if we may, on your discretion as to when us and probably others are getting into too much detail and bumping it off to the strike.
Exactly, because we will be covering it all, but reasonably to do it. I mean, the other way of doing it is to do housing supply after you've done all the allocations, but we've got it where we've got it. So we'll see. We don't want to drill down to the minutiae that we'll be dealing with in the following week, but we do want to deal with the headline. We've
got experienced professionals around the table, so presumably we can all exercise a certain amount of judgment as to what's done when.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for your, Home Builders Federation.
A quick query, just with regard to the, I suppose the homework you set in terms of the shifting the plan period and how that impacts in terms of supply. Is that for a later discussion in terms of this examination tomorrow, or
No,
what are you thinking?
No, I've just asked the council to look at that. It would be helpful for me if I had that before the weekend.
Yes, I think we propose, at least in outline, to give you those figures at some point tomorrow.
Okay.
And I'll probably have a couple of brief words as to what flows in terms of consequences, so that we can cogitate a bit over the weekend and take it forward.
Okay, and then obviously we can take that forward on the basis of that. We can take that forward. Okay, thank you very much. This hearing session is closed.